What's up, everybody? Welcome in. It's freezing here and it's very early, but I have a packed day today. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to go live later. I may, depending on what happens with a few appointments, but I wanted to make sure I jumped on this morning because when I heard this news come out, and a lot of you sent it to me on Instagram and the DMs, it's something that happens so commonly in these criminal cases, and usually it's pretty damning for the criminal defendant, at least publicly speaking. So I really want to know from your perspective what this makes you think as a just a person in the general public, even as a potential juror, if you knew about this going into the trial, sitting on a jury like this for Ruby Franke and for Hildebrand, knowing that Kevin Franke, Ruby Franke's husband, has now filed for divorce. We're going to talk about that filing. We're going to talk about what's public and what's not. We're going to read through a couple documents just to kind of give us an idea as to what's going on and that this is real, because Kevin Franke, to this point, has seemingly, not overwhelmingly on the side of his wife, but has seemingly backed her at least a little bit that this was all Hildebrand, that Ruby Franke was probably a victim of Hildebrand, and that Ruby Franke was either under the spell, but Kevin Franke had not directly pointed the finger at Ruby Franke. We'll see if anything comes out with these divorce filings that would change that, but at the very least, it seems like he's distancing himself from his wife. And he already had said, I wasn't around the kids. I didn't know what was going on. We had been separated because of Hildebrand. And some of the general public thinks that's makes total sense and is sad. And this is what happens in these situations when Hildebrand gets their claws in somebody like this, allegedly. But it's really interesting because another part of the general public has still condemned Kevin Franke, saying he had to know. He's got to be culpable. Why no charges for him? And to me, this is one step and really saying, I had nothing to do with this. Look, publicly, legally, I'm distancing myself. This should have happened a long time ago. We haven't been together. I haven't been involved in a very long time. But it could also be something totally different. It could just be the fact that she's in jail. It could just totally have to do with child custody issues, and that this, maybe a lawyer told him this would help you get custody of the kids easier, quicker, whatever it may be, especially if Ruby will sign off on it from in jail. It could be that. And that's why I want to know what you think. So we're going to get to an interview on Law and Crime from Jesse Weber, from the person that has been breaking most of this story, local boots on the ground type reporting. So we're going to hear what he has to say, and then we're going to look at a few documents. But I really want to know your input as we go through, and what does this make you think about the criminal case? Because we're not going to really follow the divorce case necessarily, or, go through the intricacies of why this is happening or why that's happening. But as far as the criminal case goes, I do think it's important. And then additionally, wrapped into this interview as well, is that there may be new laws coming, at least locally for them, that blocks life coaches and, these types of consulting of how to have a better life or how to be happier, or how people, write books and give presentations on this kind of stuff. And it's really interesting because when something really bad happens, I know we want to stop it. I know we want to prevent it from happening again. That's part of the criminal system. That's part of the punishment, is deterrence from other people committing the same crimes that these people are accused of. But how far do we want to take it? And that's an interesting part of the discussion. That's going to be kind of part 2 of this video that I didn't really expect to be having in the midst of this case, but now we are, and here we are. So hit that like button if you guys are enjoying the content we provide on the channel. And if you want to keep being part of the content and helping me determine what cases and what parts of cases we're going to be talking about, make sure you subscribe and follow us on other social media platforms. So let's get to this video now and listen together.
Here's the thing. While Jodi Hildebrandt did at one point seem to have a license as a, quote, mental health counselor in Utah, after her arrest, she ended up actually agreeing to give up her therapy license. Franke's title of, quote, certified mental fitness trainer on the Connection's website was likely less accurate, and that is raising some concern in the state of Utah, and perhaps there is going to be a change. To talk more about this, I want to bring on our expert on Ruby Franke and following all aspects of this case from the very beginning. We are joined once again by Brian Schnee, anchor reporter from KUTV2 News. Brian, so good to see you. Thanks so much for coming back on here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to always talk about developments as we see them come out in this case.
Now, Brian, I understand there's also been a big development with respect to Kevin Franke, right?
Today, November 29th, Kevin Franke filed in the state of Utah for divorce, as we understand it. And it was filed actually in the 4th District Court. And the petition for divorce is private, so we can't see a whole lot of it. But we do know that things were filed today here in the state of Utah.
So we don't know the reason for the divorce. I mean, we can assume, but we don't know the actual legal filing, the reason for it.
Domestic relations injunction outlining certain measures to govern.
These are the documents that we are going to look through together.
The conduct of both parties involved. That is about all I see on it. There are different parts of the injunction that include some prohibitions against harassment, domestic violence, misuse of personal information. So Franke filing for divorce today with not a lot of information, as that petition itself is private, but we're just learning about this right now as of today here on the 29th.
And Brian, when you hear about that, I mean, we just talked about how the idea is how he's petitioning now for a change in the law so that, people have the right qualifications to give this kind of advice, seemingly turning on his wife and Jody Hildebrand, or I should say maybe ex-wife, because he's now filing for divorce. This is consistent, I feel, from what we've heard from his lawyer, correct? And what with the position I think he's been taking, that he had no idea what was going on with Ruby Franke and the kids. I'm not surprised he filed for divorce.
Yeah, I don't think it's surprising. I just tried to trade some messages with Randy Kester earlier this week just to see if anything new was happening. And he told me, no, nothing's on the way here. And then, of course, this drops today. So this is interesting. And I think it shows that Kevin further wants to not only distance himself from Ruby, but also sort the situation out in juvenile court and figure out what to do with the kids.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance this has a lot to do with the kids. And also, it wouldn't be surprising if his criminal lawyer is also not his family law lawyer. That's a very different specialty, like we talked about in the Murdoch case. Similarly situated defendants with quasi-criminal civil actions against them, sometimes the criminal defense attorney will also be the civil defense attorney. It's very unusual for them to also be a family law attorney. So maybe when he asked the question to Kessler, by the way, is Kevin Franke's attorney for the criminal stuff, I think he hasn't been charged with a crime, but it seems like it's his criminal defense attorney, because it's not only when you've been charged with a crime that you need a criminal defense attorney, but also when you're being investigated or wrapped up in something like this. So maybe he didn't know this filing was coming. He probably did know, but he thought the question was about the criminal case and there were no new developments as far as he was concerned there. However, when we talk about why Kevin Franke is doing this and whether or not this is surprising, while I don't think it's surprising, like we talked about off the top, that he's distancing himself from Ruby Franke, I don't feel like he has ever directly pointed the finger at Ruby Franke. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm still interested to see if we get that far in this case. And if he feels like he needs to do that to protect himself. We'll see.
Let's tackle it here. So this concerns my understanding. And first of all, I should tell you that it was your network that kind of broke this news, that Utah State Senator David.
All right. Before we get into the Utah State Senator, let's take a look at this divorce petition. And this is from Jim Spiewak, I think it says. Yeah. Okay. So this is filed in the family law court, domestic relations injunction, which is what the parties have to do or are going to agree to do potentially. The parties must not. Okay. Actually, it says because the matter involves divorce, annulment. Sorry, it's a little blurry and very small. I'm doing my best to read it. I can't blow it up right now as we sit here. Child support or paternity. The court makes the following orders. These orders apply to the petitioner and respondent named above. So both Kevin Franke and Ruby Franke. Kevin Franke is the petitioner, meaning he's the one wanting to do this or petitioning the court to do this. The parties must not. It's got to be a way for me to somehow blow this up a little bit. Oh, that's not going to do it. The parties must not harass, intimidate, or disturb the peace of the other party by any means, individually, or electronically, commit domestic violence or abuse against other party or a child. That's an important one, especially with the allegations going on. Use the party's name, likeness, image, or identification to get credit, open an account, for service or obtain a service. That's interesting as well. Cancel or interfere with telephone, utility, or other services used by the other party. Cancel, modify, terminate, change the beneficiary, or allow to lapse for voluntary non-payment of premiums without the written consent of the other party or pursuant to further order of the court. Any policy of health insurance, homeowners or renters insurance, automobile insurance, or life insurance. So they're just agreeing that they're not going to change that at the last minute now that they're getting a divorce, and try to change whoever's going to be the beneficiary on something until they determine how things are going to get split, who's been paying that, who should keep paying that, things of that nature. If the petition involves the division of property, personal property, or debts, the parties must not transfer, encumber, conceal, or dispose of your property or any other party's property unless you have written consent of the other party or you have a court order, except in the usual course of business or to provide the necessities of life. So you can't hide money, you can't change assets, you can't sell something to your brother and then get it back later. This is all pretty boilerplate. This is all pretty standard. I haven't seen anything yet that would make me think, oh, this points us to something that he's going to argue in the criminal case, or this lets us know that he is going to point the finger at Ruby Franke. None of that yet. If the petition involves minor children, the parties must not take the children on non-routine travel unless you have written consent of the other party or you have a court order or the following information has been provided to the other party: an itinerary of the travel, dates, and destinations, how to contact the children or traveling party, and the name and telephone number of an available third person who will know the children's location in the presence or hearing of the children. Okay, so all of that, again, is not going to be an issue because Ruby Franke is in jail. But this part is interesting. They agree that neither of them, in the presence or hearing of the children, will demean or disparage, talk badly about the other party. That's interesting. Kevin Franke is petitioning the court, and this boilerplate language is in here. So if he's not going to demean or disparage, which I think saying your mother's a criminal or saying your mother abused you or things like that would be disparaging comments about their mother. So is this him agreeing not to point the finger at Ruby Franke? Or if he points the finger at Ruby Franke, will he be violating this agreement? I think legally and in the court of law as a witness, if he determines that and ends up testifying to that, the answer to that would be no. But while the allegations are open, while she's innocent until proven guilty, I think some of his comments would fall under this. Attempt to influence the children's preference regarding custody or parent time. Now, again, that's what he says in his actions. That's not the same as filing a petition with the court saying she's in jail, so obviously I would be the better parent to take the kids. Not the same thing. But again, I do think he has to be careful about what he says around the kids with this criminal case. He should be careful anyways, honestly, just as a father, because regardless about what happened to the kids, you need to protect them at all costs and their psyche and mental health, regardless of what actually happened. Helping them through this process is going to be very difficult. Say or do anything that would negatively affect the love and affection of the children for the other party or involve the children in the issues of the petition. So again, if the children form their own thoughts because their mother's obviously sitting in jail and they read an article or whatever it may be, that's very different than their father saying things about their mother. Now, they were already separated. They were going through Hildebrand stuff, courses. So maybe things have already been said by Ruby Franke or Kevin Franke, but now that this is in writing, maybe that's going to affect things. Make the parent time arrangement through the children. When the children are under the party's care, that party must use best efforts to prevent others from doing anything described above, and if necessary, remove the children from the situation. Again, very interesting concerning the fact that they have this active criminal case where it's very negative and nasty allegations with Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt, but specifically Ruby Franke with her actions to her kids. And then now if the kids are asking questions, that just makes it difficult. You have to be honest while protecting them, but also not violating this agreement. The domestic relations injunction is effective for the petitioner when the petition is filed, for the respondent when they receive a copy of the injunction entered by the court. The domestic relations injunction is in effect until, and this also affects what Ruby Franke may say to her children when they visit her, adult children, minor children, whatever, supervised recorded calls, whatever. This, when she gets served this then it applies to her. The domestic relations injunction is in effect until the final decree is entered, the petition is dismissed, the parties otherwise agree in a writing signed by all the parties, or the court orders otherwise. So until it's over, either by court order or agreement of the parties. A party must ask to modify or dissolve the domestic relations injunction by filing a motion. The motion will be decided as quickly as possible if it is filed before an answer to the petition or other responsive pleading is filed. The moving party must serve the non-moving party at least 48 hours before a hearing. If the motion is filed after a responsive pleading is filed, Utah Rule of Civil Procedure 7 or Rule 101 apply. If there is another order with conflicting provisions governing the parties or their minor children, the parties must comply with the provisions of the other order. This domestic relations injunction does not apply to the Office of Recovery Services. Interesting. Really interesting. So we will see. There's nothing in there necessarily that says Kevin Franke is going to point the finger at Ruby Franke, but there may be things in there that say how their kids are going to be involved in all of this. And to me, I think that is important, and that is something that should be considered. And we don't always have it in writing what that agreement should be or how parents should handle a difficult situation like this. All right, so now they transition into changing the law because people like Jody Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke should not be life coaches. They should not be teaching people how to live or what's right and what's wrong. And there are some very interesting debates. Now, if the allegations are true about Jody Hildebrandt, it's more than just what's going on in this case. We've heard other people come out of the woodworks and say how horrible she's been to them throughout their entire life, how many relationships she's allegedly negatively affected, how many people she's allegedly negatively affected. So people like her, if those allegations are true, absolutely need to be stopped. And that's the point of the criminal justice system. But Minority Report style, how far back can we go to stop stuff like this from ever happening? Can and should we protect people from themselves? How far does that go? What rights is that going to infringe upon? It's a more interesting discussion than get the bad guys, because we all want to get the bad guys. But what does that look like, and when does that start?
What to do with the kids.
Let's tackle it here. So this concerns my understanding. And first of all, I should tell you that it was your network that kind of broke this news, that Utah State Senator David Hinkins told your network, your outlet, that he has spoken with Ruby Franke's estranged husband, Kevin, about the qualifications, the certifications of Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt. Walk us through that.
First and foremost, some great reporting by my colleague Paul Nelson here at KUTV. He was working on Capitol Hill, looking at a number of different bills that are being worked on in sessions as they get preparing for a legislative session as we get to the new year. And he's been talking to people up there at the state capitol. And one of the things he had heard is that they're working on a bill, at least one state senator is, into looking at life coaches or people that kind of fit that mold. And indeed, apparently this came from some concerns from Kevin Franke. And it's interesting to note, the state senator here that's working on this bill, very beginning stages, I should say, no traction on it, no language in it as we understand, but an idea, right? Maybe starting to put pen to paper. He had not even really heard about this case as it seemed. So this came from, right. So that's what my reaction was to this. Kevin Franke reaches out to this state senator and says, hey, we need to look into this. And he even pointed to the part where, you know, it ripped apart his marriage. You have to imagine that is involving Franke and Hildebrandt's relationship. So it's almost like this goes back to Jesse Hildebrandt a little bit more than it does Ruby Franke.
So we're going to get a common theme about stuff going back to Hildebrandt more than it does Ruby Franke. He just said Jesse. Is it Jody Hildebrandt? I thought it was Jody Hildebrandt. Okay, we'll just say Hildebrandt now that I'm flaking on that. But so we're going to talk about how they continuously now start to keep pointing back to Hildebrandt, which I think is consistent with how Kevin has been publicly, number one. But number two, when you say the word life coach and people choosing it and marriages getting destroyed and how we might want to block that or put more restrictions on it, my initial response to that, and just the first thing I think as a lawyer is, and so many of these cases, regardless of what any of us individually believe, in America, we have freedom of religion. And a lot of life coaches or people that help counsel in certain scenarios that don't maybe have the same certifications or degrees as a mental health counselor out in the field or in the world, but that, you know, maybe churches refer to, or families that help other families or whatever, in all different kind of religions. I know that Mormon the Mormon religion has been in the forefront in some of these cases, but it's not just that religion. There's lots of different religions and different sects of religion that have this type of situation going on, that people do seek that out because they are like-minded. They have a baseline that they agree with that person. To cut that off or force them to have some certification that the state has to agree to or has control over could potentially infringe on Americans' right to choose the religion that they believe in and study and take counsel from and choose to live their life in or have that life view. That could be an issue, number one. Number two, there are plenty of licensed therapists by the government, state, local, whatever it may be, with degrees from schools, college, masters, PhD, that people would argue ruined their marriage, that people would argue are horrible, that have absolutely abused people, abused their power, and abused their position in the past. And we haven't just thrown out mental health counseling. We haven't just thrown out teachers. We haven't just thrown out priests. We arrest, convict, and punish the wrongdoers. And I think that's kind of, we can't go too far because people do laugh at life coaches. And I'm not going to say I've never, chuckled when I saw, like, there's somebody that handed me a card like lawyer/life coach is actually on their business card. And listen, I mean, I'm not going to say I've never chuckled at something like that, but I think there are people that really do help other people as life coaches or as consultants that maybe don't have a counseling degree or maybe don't have something specific that the state would recognize as a licensing or certification process. And give me a break. How many governmental certification processes are a joke? Right? How many undergraduate degrees are a joke? How many people don't even use their undergraduate degree? Not to say all of them are, not to say that you can't use it, but any blanket bright line rule preventing somebody from doing something if you don't have the government stamp, there are absolutely things you need to do, right? Like I shouldn't just be able to go pretend to be a cop on the street or even a lawyer, right? So there are lines and there are levels, but like if somebody wants to go ask somebody to help them pre-suit, not in court, they can do that. Should they pick a lawyer? Yes. But if they pick that person and that person lets them know they're not a lawyer, we can't really protect people from themselves. How about people that pick a bad lawyer? Because there are bad lawyers. There are horrible lawyers. We just did the sentencing of somebody who's going to spend the rest of his life in prison who was a prominent lawyer. People still have to make their choices. People still have to do their research. People still have to look into where did they go to school? Do they have certifications? And then they live with their decisions. And we can only push that so far. So I do want to know what you guys think about that. And we're going to continue to listen to them and what's going on in their state. And I don't know what the bill exactly is, but I think we have to be really careful about saying you can't do this unless the government says you can do it. And then the government puts their stamp. Now you can go help people. And I'm sure you're not going to hurt anybody or do anything wrong now that the government said you should be able to do this, And maybe I'm being too harsh on that side. And I want to know, we can disagree about this. Let's discuss it. I value your opinion.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. So Jesse Hildebrand, the niece of Jody Hildebrand,
so that's
had
what
an
he meant.
opportunity
Jesse
to interview
Hildebrand.
them.
So Kevin Franke and Jesse Hildebrand were pointing the finger about how we need to have real licensed people doing this. Okay, so Jody Hildebrand is the criminal defendant. That just threw me. Got it.
Talked about the abuse that they suffered at the hands, allegedly, at Jody Hildebrand. But walk us through, the idea here, before we even get into the state of Utah and what is required or not required of these kinds of instructors, the idea that Kevin would approach this state senator. Are you surprised by that?
I am. I also don't know what the timeline looked like of when exactly this happened. I would imagine it's relatively recent, given the fact that lawmakers are starting to meet at the Capitol and go through the process of drafting bills and making change. And obviously, there's a large process after you even put the language out there. But it's interesting to know that this comes from inside the family to want to make a big change here in Utah about what is qualified and what needs to be put out there to coach people on their lives.
And let's talk about that. So in Utah, to be this kind of life coach, are there any qualifications?
No, the Division of Professional Licensing here in Utah, we refer to them as DOPL. And we've covered them before when talking about Hildebrandt's license being suspended many years ago. So DOPL is involved in the licensing for clinical, mental health and other therapists, which is what Jody had a license for way back when. But DOPL has never had any sort of restriction on a life coach being licensed.
And that's just kind of my point. Jody Hildebrand fits into both of these buckets. So if she turns out to be the bad guy at the end, the licensing would not have protected the people that she hurt. So do we need this rule? Do we need this law? That's the question I have. We don't want more laws if we don't need them.
Licensed in Utah. There's no standards for that industry here in the state. And you'd be hard pressed to find many states, as far as we understand it, here in the country where the life coaches have to have those standards put out there for their clients to understand. So the big thing we took away from this, Jesse, was if you're seeking a life coach, you better do your homework.
Exactly. And I think that should be the message. And we don't necessarily need a law for that. But titles are important and words are important. And that's why people call themselves life coaches and not mental health counselors, because mental health counselors probably need some kind of degree or certification in most jurisdictions. And life coaches, which is kind of a newer term, probably don't. And if they end up throwing life coach in there, maybe they'll start calling themselves something else. And that's the point. People are going to seek out and find eventually what they want. And if there's a hole in the market, for some people probably don't want somebody licensed by the government or with that kind of training. They want them to have some different kind of training, or based on their life experience, and they have a shared life experience. They're like, you know what? Everybody who has 6 kids, I want to go to somebody that only has 6 kids. And based on that life experience, I think that's more important than a degree.
And I guess the reason was, and I was reading about this, is they don't want to create too many requirements because there are people who could help their family members or their friends. And if you put too much of a stringent requirement in place, it might impact that. I mean, does that make sense to you?
Or people may be bad at taking tests, bad at going to school, not have enough money for school, not have enough time for school because they're raising a family. There's a million reasons why good people can still do things without degrees. Not to say degrees are bad. Obviously, I have a lot of degrees. I went to school for a long time. I value education. I think it's very important, but it's not the only thing. We have, just in our office, we have paralegals with degrees that are great. We have paralegals without degrees that are great and that have done it off of 20 years of experience.
Because that's what I saw.
It doesn't surprise me here in Utah that they wouldn't want to add more requirements. It's just kind of how things have been, at least in my experience since I've been here. However, the bills that are being drafted on Capitol Hill here, I feel like are more on current issues. Now, this is not as much of an issue, I think, as it is a very large play given this case, right? There's a lot of talk about life coaches now and what this mental fitness sort of coach looks like. So it doesn't surprise me that it's coming to light. It did surprise me that it's coming from Kevin Franke, apparently. That's where it's coming from. So it's interesting that the state senator is willing to look into it, first and foremost, which if you live here in the state and someone is your elected official, then you want to obviously have someone advocate for you on a larger scale. But it's using this high profile case where 2 people are still incarcerated and in custody over child abuse allegations and charges. And that's where this bill comes from. And again, no language on paper yet, but it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. And it's my understanding that Senator Hinkins would like to work with the Division of Professional Licensing here in Utah to get this done. And Doppel said, we don't want to comment on this until that bill is drafted.
Well, few things there. So first of all,
because they want to know what language is actually in the bill before they comment on it to see if they agree with it or not.
I'll say with Kevin Franke, doing this or allegedly contacting the state senator kind of shows how he feels about his wife and kind of feels how he feels about Jody Hildebrand and what they were doing. Now, the Utah Division of Professional Licensing said, quote, life coaches are not required to be licensed in Utah. Therefore, there are no standards for the industry. There are a few national life coach consortiums that have some standards, but none that are enforceable in Utah yet. We do see some complaints that are against life coaches who are for.
But like, if you're a person looking for this, you might only go to one that's been certified by the National Life Coach, whatever, right? You can make that decision if you want.
Former licensed behavioral health practitioners who lost a license and are now practicing as life coaches, but are providing the same services as when they were licensed, which is illegal. Now, so everybody knows, Brian, what are the complaints about connections? I mean, there were former clients who came out and said that what was going on was a problem, right? What do we know about the former clients of Connections, the former clients of Franke and Hildebrand?
Well, a lot of this stems from the people that we've spoken to over the last few months that have their own personal story to share. And I want to make sure we clarify, all these stories are really about Jody Hildebrand. They're not about Ruby Franke. Franke's a different part of this piece.
And that's important to me. Because again, with the focus on the criminal case and how this is all going to go down, maybe Kevin Franke and Jesse Hildebrand are pushing this and talking to the state senators and getting this stuff on Capitol Hill, changing the laws, getting new laws put in place because they want to point the finger at the person that was licensed, wasn't licensed the way they should have been, saying they were a life coach, doing things that were nefarious, ruining people's lives. And they are still trying to ultimately point the finger at Jody Hildebrand and not Ruby Franke. Because that's where I really feel it feels like everybody is going. is they really want to drop the hammer on the head of the snake, which they think is Jody Hildebrandt. And Ruby Franke, although maybe more famous on YouTube and things like that, is getting swept in as problematic and did things wrong, but as a lesser criminal in this entire situation. That's the feeling I'm getting publicly. I don't know that to be true. And obviously it's her kids. So the responsibilities are different when it's actually your kids versus, Jody's position in all of this. But it's really interesting that it keeps coming back to pointing to Jody Hildebrandt.
So talking about Connections Classroom and the types of tactics that were used, a lot of them, of course, focusing on making one individual in a relationship feeling guilty or feeling like they've had some sort of wrongdoing. A lot of this becomes sexual in nature or has to do with separating the couple to find this common goal. And ultimately, what we've heard is Hildebrandt's tactics ruined marriages compared to what you would want from a therapist or somebody trying to get you through those tough times, which would be bringing you together. It's almost as though she ripped couples apart, as far as what we understand.
Okay, so we want to say,
and that is the same thing that other people said to me. That reporting about Trey Warner from the same individual, my colleague here, Paul Nelson, who brought this story to us too. So great reporting by Paul all the way around to get this part of what happens next after this case on a larger scale, after talking to people like Trey. And Trey was very early on. I'm thinking week 1 or week 2 after we heard about the arrest. Trey was one of the early individuals to speak with us about what Jody Hildebrandt was doing to her clients, ripping them apart, forcing the man to separate, and ultimately creating this natural divide, it seemed, instead of, again, bringing people together.
So just before we wrap this up.
So again, the methods also are different than the certifications or the schooling or government involvement, right? If there are criminal measures that therapists or life coaches are taking, then we punish that. If there are things we don't agree with, that's different. It's just a really hard situation because, again, what works with one couple might not work for the next. What works with one child might not work for the next. And seeking professional help or, help from people who have experienced it in the past usually is a good thing. It can be a bad thing, but it's so hard to regulate it. It's just so hard to regulate.
I want to talk one more time about the Ruby Franke aspect. You talked about how Jody Hildebrandt, her former client.
That's why there are lines in what's a crime and what's not. And then there are lines in what could get more severe punishment versus a lesser punishment. And to insert ourselves in the process when we already have kind of the criminal statutes in place can be overreaching by the government that we have to watch out about, I think. We don't want the government reaching into our families like this so much that we can't even choose the people that we want to seek advice from. Like imagine if every lawyer was a court-appointed lawyer, like what's going on in Delphi, and only the judge got to pick your lawyer. I don't think we would like that.
Not too happy with her services. Well, going back to Senator Hankins, he said, quote, right now, there's nothing regulating. They can tell people to do anything they want. There's no recourse. I think that those that are...
It's not true. There is recourse. They can't tell them to do things that are criminal. They can't tell them to abuse their kids. Well, it's happened. But if they do, it's criminal and they get arrested. And it's public. So there are certain protections in place.
Professing to be life coaches should have some type of a criteria that they need to some credibility. And then I believe he said in terms...
I think they need to give proper advertising and promotion. There are a lot of laws in place where you have to say what your experience is, what you've done, what you will do, what services you provide, why, maybe client testimonials, whatever it may be. It's just like a general contractor. Like they have to have certain things in their license and promotional materials. And I think that might be a better way is make sure you're being honest and transparent and telling the person, this is who I am. This is what I bring to the table. And then let the person make the decision for themselves.
In terms of Franke's title as a certified mental fitness trainer, it's just a title that somebody could make up and makes it sound professional when it's really probably not. Do you have any evidence or any kind of reporting about the problems in Ruby Franke's counseling?
By the way, I also think it's totally fine if people will not go to a mental health counselor unless they are educated or certified or whatever it may be. I think that's totally fine too. And people should be allowed to do that and put those restrictions on where they would go. I wouldn't go to a doctor that didn't go to medical school. I wouldn't go to a lawyer that didn't go to law school.
Obviously, with what she's accused of and what she professed through connections and her videos, we can come up and say something's not adding up. But have you heard any complaints directly about Ruby Franke?
No, most of it's on Jody Hildebrand. And again, on, online comments or reviews or the people that have spoken to us about this, but none about Ruby's practice, so to say, about what she's listed as on the Connections Classroom website.
Did she actually do any practice, or was she just used by Jody for advertising and marketing to get a further reach? That's a good question too.
So a lot of that is speculative, I think, right now, of trying to figure out, have people seen her for counseling? What did she really do with people? What sort of advice was she giving? How was she coaching these individuals? A lot of that still hasn't come to light yet.
Ryan Schnee, you can check.
So from my perspective, a lot of homework for you guys, because I really want to know what you think about what filing for divorce looks like now for the Frankies and for especially Ruby Franke in these criminal proceedings. And number two, I really want to know your thoughts on this whole discussion about mental health counselors, certifications, life coaches. Should there be a difference? Should they be synonymous? And could they make the language even broader for anybody that provides any type of counsel or advice to somebody, which would encompass all of this? So it's a really interesting discussion. I want to know what you guys think. And I'm sure we're all going to have different backgrounds and experiences that we're going to bring to the table in the comments. And I'm looking forward to look through those and see what you guys think. But I appreciate you joining me for this one. Hit that like button on your way out if you haven't already. And please make sure you subscribe to our page. We are steadily climbing to 300,000, which is going to be an awesome benchmark to hit. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.